Playdough Troubleshooting. If I'm making multiple batches, I like to pre-mix all my dry ingredients and my oil. At this point, I can have the kids each mix a bowl. And then I grab my big metal bowl and add the dry ingredients to it before I add the water. In this case, with the blue color, I decided to make the Play-Doh as I normally do. So I mixed all the dry ingredients together, the oil, gave it an extra mix, and then I added the food dye to the hot water before I added them together. I like to add the food dye to the water so there's no food dye getting onto your fingers. It's more diluted right away. Once I had it mostly mixed up, I like to dump it onto the table because I find it's easier to knead it together to get it all to come together than it is to just mix it with a spatula. And then once it cools down enough, you can use your hands. Even using these ratios, sometimes I find it still a little bit too wet, so I can easily sprinkle on some flour and knead it back in. Be sure to get any extra goodness off your spatula or your bowl or the table as you go. And there you have it. Perfect Play-Doh. After stopping to take a picture, I decided to add a little bit more flour. So I just sprinkled it on the table and then I kneaded it in. Perfect Play-Doh. For the next color, green, I wanted to show you what it looks like when the Play-Doh is too dry. I chose not to pour all the water into the dry ingredients so you can see what it looks like if your Play-Doh is too dry by making it even drier than it probably would be. Again, I try and mix up all the wet bits to fully incorporate it together as much as I can, and then I dump it out, scrape all the bits out of the bowl so I'm not missing any good Play-Doh, and then I incorporate it together on the table. As you can see, it's really dry. I still tried to knead it together to see how dry it is before deciding it really needs more water. As you can see, when you pull it apart, it breaks apart so easily. So this is really dry Play-Doh. So to add more water, I decided to make a little volcano and fill it up and then knead it together until it looks like it's fully incorporated. At first you'll have really wet bits and really dry bits. So the wet bits will stick to your fingers. And then just keep analyzing. See here, when I pull it apart, it still clumps apart really easily, so you can still see it's breaking. So I created another volcano, added some more water, and kneaded it together. While working with the Play-Doh, I asked myself questions like, is it feeling too wet on my fingers? Is it too dry? If it's too wet, it's sticking to your hands. If it's too dry, breaking apart too easily. And here, I pulled it slightly apart and it didn't break apart, so I knew it was the right texture. For the next color, brown, I wanted to show you what it would look like when your Play-Doh is so wet. I decided to take advantage of wanting wet Play-Doh and use tempera paint to dye it instead of food dye. This works perfectly if you don't have food dye or if you want a color that you know will be complicated to make. Because I'm showing you wet Play-Doh, I added all my water. If you were making this with tempera paint, I'd recommend leaving some of the water out because as you saw before, you can easily add some back in if your Play-Doh is too dry. And then I squirted the paint in. It wasn't dark enough, so I added some more paint. As you can see, I have a really wet mixture and I know it would stick to the table, so I decided to add a bunch of flour to the table and then directly put the Play-Doh onto the flour instead of directly onto the table. Even with this, I had it sticking all over to my hands and the spatula and the table as I was mixing it in. And then I find the best thing to do when your Play-Doh is way too wet is to just keep incorporating flour. You just keep kneading it in so it's fully mixed in, and if it keeps sticking to your fingers or the table, you know it's too wet. If you find it sticking to the table a bit too much, you can use your spatula as a bench scraper and scrape it all up directly back into your Play-Doh, and then just keep kneading it. If you're not sure, you can always stick your hand in and see if it sticks to your hand or if it pulls away like the properly mixed Play-Doh, and then just add a bit more flour. Worst case, if you add too much flour and it gets too dry and breaks apart, you can always add some water. I recommend using less water than you'll think you'll need because even though I was able to recover this Play-Doh, you don't want to run out of flour, especially right now when flour is so important. So it's better to have too dry Play-Doh and add water than it is to have too wet Play-Doh. And there you go, the final Play-Doh. Looking at it like this, it's a bit hard to tell which was too dry and which was too wet and which started out basically perfect. Thank you for watching. I hope you're all staying safe and you're having a good week. Bye.